Picture this. You're scrolling through your social media feed and suddenly you see an image that makes you stop mid-swipe. It's grainy, it's fuzzy, and it looks like someone sneezed on a camera lens while pointing it at the night sky. But this isn't just any random space photo gone wrong. This is supposed to be humanity's best shot at photographing one of the most mysterious objects ever detected in our solar system. An interstellar visitor that has scientists whispering theories they're afraid to say out loud. Welcome back to another deep dive into the cosmic mysteries that keep astronomers awake at night. I'm absolutely thrilled you've decided to join me as we explore something that's been unfolding in real time over the past few months. Before we dive into what might be one of the most significant cover-ups in modern astronomy, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your corner of our pale blue dot. And if you find yourself drawn to these cosmic enigmas that challenge everything we think we know, I'd be incredibly grateful if you hit that like button and consider subscribing to our growing community of truth seekers. Get ready. The journey begins now. Tonight we're talking about 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object ever detected passing through our solar system. But here's the thing that should make your skin crawl with curiosity. Every single image released by major space agencies looks deliberately terrible. Every official statement reads like damage control. And every day that passes, the theory that once seemed completely insane is starting to look disturbingly plausible. The saga began in earnest this past October when the European Space Agency dropped what they promised would be the closest, most detailed images yet of this enigmatic visitor. 7 different spacecraft from 4 separate space agencies had positioned themselves for what should have been the photo shoot of the century. Billions of dollars in cutting-edge space technology, all focused on capturing clear images of an object that represents one of the rarest phenomena in astronomy. And then the photos dropped. What we got was so underwhelming, so frustratingly inadequate, that the astronomy community collectively lost its mind. The images showed nothing more than a fuzzy white dot creeping across a star field, providing absolutely zero new information about what we're actually looking at. Within hours, social media exploded with comparisons that made the space agencies look completely incompetent. Amateur astrophotographers with backyard telescopes were capturing sharper, more detailed images of comets millions of miles farther away. Yet here were the most sophisticated space cameras ever built, positioned at the perfect distance for observation, delivering images that wouldn't qualify for a high school science project. The backlash was immediate and merciless. Astronomy forums erupted with technical analyses proving that the cameras should have been capable of much better resolution. The math was straightforward and damning. At the distance 3I Atlas was photographed from, the object should have occupied multiple pixels in the final images, potentially revealing structure, shape, or surface features. But here's where the story takes a disturbing turn. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a case of equipment malfunction or poor timing. The European Space Agency knew exactly what kind of images their cameras would produce before they even pressed the shutter button. They admitted as much in their official statements, acknowledging that the object was thousands of times fainter than their usual targets. So why release images they knew would be inadequate? Why build up months of anticipation only to deliver something that provides zero scientific value? The timing feels deliberately orchestrated, like a pressure release valve designed to give the public something to look at, while the real data stays locked away in classified servers. Because make no mistake about this, there are better images, much better images, and they're being withheld from public view for reasons that become more suspicious with each passing day. While the European Space Agency was releasing fuzzy dots that told us nothing, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter was capturing something entirely different with its high-rise camera. This instrument represents the pinnacle of space-based photography, capable of distinguishing objects the size of a dining room table from Mars orbit. When 3I Atlas made its closest approach, HiRISE had a resolution advantage that should have revealed any unusual features with crystal clarity. The silence from NASA has been deafening. Not a single image, not a preliminary report, not even an acknowledgement that observations were attempted. The official excuse is the government shutdown that furloughed thousands of NASA employees at exactly the wrong moment. But this explanation starts to fall. It's not just apart when you realize, quiet. China NASA, that's Gon's Tianwen-1 orbiter, was perfectly positioned to capture detailed images with its moderate resolution imaging camera. Complete radio silence. The UAE's Hope orbiter, equipped with sophisticated imaging systems, had an unobstructed view during the flyby. Nothing released. Multiple space agencies, multiple sovereign governments, with completely separate bureaucracies and political systems, all simultaneously unable or unwilling to share their observations of the most scientifically significant visitor our solar system has received in years. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Either we're witnessing the most spectacular case of coordinated incompetence in the history of space exploration, or something was photographed that requires very careful consideration before public release. The conspiracy-minded suggest the images show features so anomalous that releasing them without proper context would trigger mass panic. That theory sounds absurd until you start looking at what amateur astronomers have been capturing from their backyards. On the exact day 3I Atlas made its closest approach to Mars, a Portuguese amateur astronomer uploaded an image that immediately went viral across every major astronomy forum and social media platform. Using nothing more than a solar telescope and aggressive digital enhancement, he captured what appears to be geometric structures within the object's coma. Dark angular shapes that don't match the typical diffuse glow of a comet's gas and dust envelope. The image sparked an immediate war between two camps. One group saw clear evidence of artificial structures, proof that 3I Atlas represents something far more significant than mainstream science admits. The other group dismissed it as classic pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist, amplified by inappropriate equipment and aggressive image processing. The debunkers had solid technical arguments. Solar telescopes use specialized filters designed for observing the sun's extreme brightness, not faint deep space objects. The equipment simply wasn't built for this kind of observation. Add digital enhancement algorithms trying to create detail where none exists, and you have a recipe for seeing faces in clouds. But here's what makes this whole situation so intriguing. The amateur astronomer who captured the image isn't some random conspiracy theorist with a cheap telescope and overactive imagination. His track record spans over a decade of legitimate astrophotography work, with careful documentation of his methods and equipment. When pressed about the anomalous features in his image, he didn't double down with wild claims. Instead, he acknowledged uncertainty and promised additional observations when the object becomes visible again. His measured, scientific response made the immediate debunking campaign feel defensive and coordinated. Within 24 hours, multiple websites published articles specifically attacking his capture, all using remarkably similar language to establish the narrative that nothing unusual had been photographed. The timing and tone suggested someone needed to quickly control the story before it gained too much traction. Then the enhancement wars began in earnest. Users across Reddit, Twitter, and various online communities started downloading the original space agency images and running them through their own processing algorithms. Some used standard astronomical techniques for sharpening faint objects. Others employed artificial intelligence tools designed for enhancing low-resolution photographs. A few went completely overboard, with machine learning models trained to reconstruct details from minimal data. The results varied wildly, creating a spectrum from slightly sharper versions of the same fuzzy dot to images showing distinct geometric patterns and structures that seem too regular to be natural ice and rock. The problem with aggressive image enhancement is that once you start using AI tools, you're no longer looking at what's actually there. You're looking at what an algorithm thinks should be there based on its training data. This created a perfect storm of confusion. Within 48 hours of the official photo release, dozens of supposedly enhanced versions were circulating online. Most were obviously fake, digital art created by people with too much time and Photoshop skills. But mixed in with the obvious hoaxes were a handful of images that felt different, more subtle, less sensational, showing just enough unusual regularity to make you wonder whether something real was being obscured by the flood of manufactured evidence. The situation reached a tipping point when an anonymous post appeared on an online forum, claiming to be from a doctoral researcher with access to the combined observational data. The level of technical detail was unsettling, describing specific spectroscopic anomalies that would fundamentally challenge our understanding of what 3i Atlas actually represents. According to the anonymous source, the object is releasing massive amounts of nickel gas while showing virtually no iron emissions. In normal cosmic chemistry, nickel and iron are inseparable partners, formed together in stellar explosions and traveling together through interstellar space. Finding abundant nickel without iron is like discovering smoke without fire. It violates basic assumptions about how matter behaves in natural environments. The post described additional contradictions. Thermal measurements showing the object remains inexplicably cold despite releasing enormous amounts of gas and dust. Trajectory analysis revealing a path so precisely aimed that random gravitational perturbations during millions of years of interstellar travel seem impossible. Chemical signatures that don't match any known natural process. Most disturbing was the suggestion that 3i Atlas might represent what the anonymous poster called a post-biological entity. Not a conventional spacecraft, not a natural comet, but something in between. A technological artifact from a civilization so advanced that their machines operate according to principles we don't recognize as artificial. The post gained massive traction before moderators locked discussion threads, and the original disappeared from view. But screenshots had already been shared across dozens of platforms, fragmenting into parallel conversations that pulled the claims in different directions. Some focused on the chemical impossibilities, others zeroed in on the trajectory precision that seemed to violate statistical probability. Meanwhile, NASA's Perseverance rover captured something in the Martian night sky that added another layer of confusion to an already bewildering situation. The image showed an elongated streak of light that, when analysed for scale, suggested something approximately 50,000 kilometers in length. That's not a comet nucleus. That's not even a comet with a tail. That's something else entirely, something nearly 4 times wider than Earth itself. The measurements sparked immediate speculation about whether 3i Atlas had been hiding its true size and nature behind clouds of gas and dust. Was this actually a massive cylindrical object masquerading as a natural comet? The timing felt significant, occurring just one day after the Mars flyby when all professional space agencies had mysteriously gone quiet. The speculation reached high enough levels that members of Congress began requesting expert analysis outside normal NASA communication channels. Think about that for a moment. Elected officials felt compelled to seek independent interpretation of photographs from Mars because they couldn't get straight answers from the space agency itself. The expert analysis that followed was thorough and initially reassuring. The calculations showed that the streak wasn't displaying the object's actual size, but rather its motion smeared across time during a long exposure. The apparent length matched perfectly with the object's known velocity over the integration period. Case closed, another conspiracy theory debunked by careful mathematics. Except the analysis included one sentence that conspiracy theorists latched onto like a lifeline. If the images represented single snapshots rather than composite exposures, then what Perseverance photographed wasn't 3i Atlas at all, but something else entirely. Something closer to Mars, something that could create an elongated streak without requiring planet-sized dimensions. The qualifier opened a door that no amount of subsequent explanation could close. NASA hasn't confirmed whether the images are composites or single frames. They haven't released metadata showing exposure times, or the processing methods government shutdown excuse applies here too, leaving basic technical questions unanswered at the worst possible moment. As we stand here tonight, looking up at stars that seem somehow less reassuring than they did a few months ago, we're faced with a growing collection of anomalies that resist easy explanation. Any single oddity could be dismissed as measurement error, equipment malfunction, or simple coincidence. But when you start stacking these irregularities on top of each other, when you multiply small probabilities together, the compound improbability becomes much harder to ignore. We're living through what might be the most significant astronomical event in human history, and the institutions we trust to interpret these phenomena seem determined to provide as little information as possible. Whether through incompetence or design, we've created a situation where the most important questions remain unanswered while public curiosity reaches fever pitch. The next few weeks will be crucial. 3i Atlas is approaching its closest point to the Sun, hidden behind our star where no Earth-based telescope can observe what happens during this critical phase. When it emerges in early November, we'll finally know whether this visitor behaves like a natural comet or demonstrates capabilities that force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about what's possible in our cosmic neighborhood. The silence surrounding what happens next has created a perfect storm of speculation and dread. For weeks, 3i Atlas has been racing toward perihelion, that critical moment when it passes closest to our Sun. This is when any natural comet should reveal its true nature, either erupting in dramatic outgassing as solar radiation superheats its icy surface, or potentially fragmenting under the immense thermal stress. But here's the terrifying part: we won't be able to see any of it happen. During perihelion passage, 3i Atlas will be positioned directly behind the Sun from Earth's perspective, completely hidden from every ground-based telescope on our planet. The object will be lost in solar glare during what should be its most active and revealing moment. Some call this unfortunate timing. Others see it as suspiciously convenient. If you wanted to do something without being watched, you couldn't pick a better cosmic hiding spot. This invisible window has astronomers on edge because it represents a fundamental gap in our observational coverage. For months, we've been tracking this object's approach, documenting its unusual properties, questioning its origins. And now, at the moment when all our questions could potentially be answered, we're forced to look away. The implications of this observational blackout extend far beyond simple scientific curiosity. If 3i Atlas is indeed a natural comet, the intense solar radiation at perihelion should trigger massive outgassing events. The Sun will deposit gigawatts of energy onto its surface, heating any ice or volatile compounds to temperatures that cause explosive sublimation. We should see dramatic changes in brightness, possibly the formation of multiple tails, maybe even complete structural failure as the object breaks apart. But what if it doesn't behave like a comet at all? Some researchers have quietly suggested that perihelion might serve an entirely different purpose for a technological object. The gravitational field around our Sun creates what's essentially a cosmic slingshot, capable of accelerating objects to incredible velocities. Any civilization advanced enough to travel between stars would certainly understand how to exploit this gravitational assist for course corrections or acceleration. Even more unsettling is the possibility that perihelion passage could provide cover for activities we're not prepared to observe or understand. The retrograde orbit of 3i Atlas means it's moving opposite to the direction our planets travel around the Sun. From behind our star, any smaller objects released or deployed wouldn't have to fight against planetary motion to reach Earth. They could simply drop into interc mechanics handle the rest. Dissect trajectories and let orbital scenario sounds like science fiction until you start running the actual calculations. The energy requirements for such maneuvers fall well within the realm of possibility for any civilization capable of interstellar travel. The timing would be perfect, the concealment absolute, and the strategic advantage overwhelming. While professional astronomers struggle with equipment limitations and bureaucratic constraints, a growing network of amateur observers has been quietly documenting phenomena that don't appear in any official reports. These backyard scientists, working with modest budgets but unlimited curiosity, have been capturing images and data that paint an increasingly disturbing picture. Several independent observers have reported unusual radio emissions from the direction of 3I Atlas, signals that don't match the random noise typically associated with natural celestial bodies. The frequencies detected fall within ranges commonly used for communication and navigation systems. Most intriguingly, some of these emissions appear to be structured, showing patterns that suggest deliberate modulation rather than random cosmic static. The response from official channels has been predictably dismissive. Atmospheric interference, equipment calibration issues, terrestrial signal contamination. Every observation gets explained away with technical jargon that sounds authoritative but feels increasingly hollow. The pattern is always the same. Amateur astronomers detect something interesting. Professional institutions either ignore it completely or provide explanations that don't quite address what was actually observed. This dismissive attitude becomes particularly troubling when you consider the historical precedent. Nearly 50 years ago, Ohio State University's Big Ear radio telescope detected a 72-second burst of radio energy so unusual that the astronomer who found it simply wrote, "Wow," on the printout. That signal coming from the direction of Sagittarius has never been satisfactorily explained despite decades of follow-up observations. Recent calculations have revealed a disturbing coincidence. When researchers backtracked the trajectory of 3I Atlas to where it would have been in August 1977, they found it was positioned roughly 9 degrees away from the location that produced the WOW signal. In the vastness of interstellar space, with objects potentially arriving from any direction, the probability of this alignment is less than 1%. The correlation becomes even more intriguing when you consider the power requirements. If 3I Atlas transmitted the WOW signal from its calculated 1977 position, the broadcast would have required between half a gigawatt and 2 gigawatts of power. That's equivalent to the output of a large nuclear reactor, focused into a narrow radio beam capable of crossing interstellar distances without significant degradation. For a civilization attempting to announce its presence or conduct reconnaissance of our solar system, such a transmission would represent an efficient use of resources. Send a powerful, detectable signal while still far enough away to observe our response without immediate risk. If we showed signs of technological capability and peaceful intent, proceed with closer approach. If we appeared hostile or unpredictable, alter course and avoid contact. The fact that 3I Atlas continued its approach after 1977 might indicate we passed some kind of preliminary evaluation, or it might suggest that 48 years provided sufficient time to complete whatever survey was intended, making direct contact unnecessary. This interpretation transforms our current situation from passive observation of a cosmic curiosity into something far more consequential. We might not just be watching an interstellar visitor, we might be the subjects of an intelligence assessment that began nearly half a century ago and is now entering its final phase. The evidence supporting this theory continues to accumulate in ways that make conventional explanations increasingly strained. The object's trajectory represents a statistical anomaly that becomes more improbable the more carefully you examine it. Most interstellar visitors should arrive at random angles relative to our solar system's plane. but 3I Atlas entered with an orbital inclination of less than 5 degrees, placing it in roughly 1% of possible arrival angles. This shallow approach angle can't be explained by the object's origin in our galaxy's disk, because the galactic plane is tilted 60 degrees relative to our solar system. If this visitor came from a typical star system and was ejected randomly, we'd expect it to arrive at a much steeper angle. The alignment is backwards from what galactic geometry predicts. Compare this to the only other interstellar objects we've detected. Oumuamua arrived with an inclination of 123 degrees, wildly tilted and consistent with random arrival from interstellar space. 2I Borisov had an inclination of 44 degrees, also steep and fitting expected patterns. Both behaved exactly as predicted for natural interstellar debris. 3I Atlas is the statistical outlier, the anomaly that doesn't fit the pattern. Even if we generously estimate the probability of such an alignment at 10%, we're still looking at something that should only happen once in every 10 interstellar objects we detect. We've only found 3, the odds of the third being the rare exception rather than following the established rule strongly disfavor coincidence. When you layer this trajectory analysis on top of the chemical anomalies, the missing high-resolution images, the coordinated silence from multiple space agencies, and the government shutdown occurring at exactly the wrong moment, the compound improbability becomes staggering. Any single element could be explained away, but the combination creates a pattern that resists conventional interpretation. The most disturbing aspect of our current predicament is how completely unprepared we are for what might happen next. Our detection systems are optimized for finding large, potentially dangerous asteroids, not sophisticated objects that might be deliberately avoiding easy classification. Our diplomatic protocols assume any extraterrestrial contact will be announced through dramatic, unambiguous signals, not subtle reconnaissance missions conducted over decades. If 3I Atlas represents first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization, we're experiencing it through a fog of institutional incompetence, bureaucratic secrecy, and public confusion. The most significant event in human history is unfolding in real time, and we're getting our information from leaked forum posts, amateur astronomers, and social media speculation. The next few days will either validate our most paranoid suspicions or expose them as elaborate delusions built from insufficient data and overactive imaginations. When 3I Atlas emerges from behind the Sun in early November, ground-based telescopes will finally be able to track it again. We'll measure its trajectory to determine if any course corrections occurred during perihelion passage. We'll analyze its brightness and spectral characteristics to see if the close solar encounter triggered expected comet-like behavior. If it emerges on the same hyperbolic trajectory it entered with, showing clear signs of thermal stress and outgassing consistent with solar heating, then we're probably looking at an unusual but ultimately natural interstellar comet. The chemical anomalies become measurement uncertainties. The trajectory coincidences become statistical flukes. The missing images become bureaucratic delays during an unfortunate government shutdown. But if 3I Atlas demonstrates even subtle trajectory alterations that can't be explained by outgassing thrust, if radio telescopes detect structured transmissions, if the eventually released NASA images show geometric features that shouldn't exist on natural objects, then we're facing a reality that will challenge every assumption about our place in the cosmos. The implications extend far beyond scientific discovery into realms of geopolitics, economics, philosophy, and human psychology. Financial markets respond to uncertainty, and the uncertainty of confirmed extraterrestrial visitation would represent an existential level disruption to every established system of thought and governance. We're balanced on the edge between the familiar universe, where we're alone and significant, and an alien cosmos where we're neither. The next few weeks will determine which reality we inhabit, and whether humanity is ready for the answer to questions we've been asking since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was looking back. The worst part about our current situation isn't the uncertainty itself. It's the growing realization that we might already have our answers, locked away in classified databases and restricted server farms across multiple continents. While the public debates fuzzy photographs and amateur observations, the site's real data in digital vaults deemed too sensitive for civilian eyes. Consider what we know about the institutional response to 3i Atlas. This isn't just one agency going quiet. This is a coordinated silence spanning multiple governments, multiple space programs, multiple scientific institutions that normally compete for recognition and prestige. The European Space Agency, NASA, China's National Space Administration, the UAE's space program. Organizations that can't agree on basic cooperation protocols somehow all decided simultaneously to withhold their best observational data. That level of coordination doesn't happen by accident. It requires communication, planning, and shared understanding of why secrecy serves everyone's interests better than transparency. When institutions that built their reputations on public disclosure suddenly go dark, you have to ask what they're protecting us from, or what they're protecting themselves from. The timing of the American government shutdown adds another layer of convenient cover to this information blackout. Just as public interest peaks, just as congressional representatives start asking uncomfortable questions, the entire NASA communication apparatus goes offline. Thousands of employees furloughed, websites frozen, press releases suspended. The perfect bureaucratic excuse for avoiding accountability during the most critical observation window in modern astronomy. But government shutdowns don't affect private contractors, international partners, or automated data collection systems. They don't prevent the release of images that were captured weeks earlier and already processed. The shutdown explanation works only if you don't think too carefully about how space agencies actually operate during political disruptions. Meanwhile, something else has been happening that barely registered in mainstream coverage, but should terrify anyone paying attention. Content about 3i Atlas has been disappearing from social media platforms with alarming consistency, not flagged as misinformation, not marked with warning labels, simply vanishing without explanation or recourse. Reddit threads analysing the chemical anomalies gain hundreds of upvotes and dozens of comments before suddenly disappearing from the platform entirely. When users try to repost the same content, their submissions fail to appear in search results or community feeds. Shadow banned without notification, quietly suppressed through algorithmic manipulation that's deniable but unmistakable. Twitter accounts that built followings by covering space news report dramatic drops in engagement whenever they post about 3i Atlas. Content that would normally reach tens of thousands of people plateaus at a few hundred views. No official restrictions, no warning messages, just algorithmic throttling sophisticated enough to avoid detection, but aggressive enough to control the narrative. YouTube presents its own pattern of suppression. Content creators who post analysis videos speculating about anomalous features receive demonetization notices within hours of upload. The stated reasons vary, but the effect remains consistent. Discuss 3i Atlas as a natural comet, and your content gets promoted normally. Suggest there might be unexplained phenomena worth investigating, and suddenly your video becomes unsuers. Facebook Eatable for advertisers' approach has been the most overt, with their fact-checking system aggressively labeling 3i Atlas content as missing context or partly false. Even posts that simply quote published scientific papers get slapped with warnings that redirect users to articles explaining why they shouldn't worry about interstellar visitors. The subtext is clear. Trust the authorities, don't speculate, move along. This coordinated suppression campaign reveals something profound about how information warfare operates in the digital age. You don't need to completely censor dangerous ideas. You just need to make them harder to find, share, and discuss. Reduce their reach, fragment their audience, muddy the waters with enough conflicting information that people give up trying to determine what's actually true. The timing of this suppression correlates perfectly with the release of those disappointing official images. Right when public frustration was peaking over the lack of quality data, the platforms that enable public discourse began quietly limiting that discourse. As if someone recognized that uncontrolled speculation was becoming more dangerous than controlled disappointment. Some content creators have adapted by using coded language to avoid automated detection systems. Instead of 3i Atlas, they refer to the visitor or the October object. Instead of extraterrestrial or artificial, they use non-terrestrial or anomalous. It's like watching the development of a new vocabulary in real time, designed to discuss topics that algorithms have been trained to suppress. The Streisand effect has kicked in with predictable results. The more aggressively content gets suppressed, the more people assume there's something worth hiding. Every fact-check article that attempts to debunk speculation just amplifies suspicion that speculation needs to be debunked. Every algorithmic throttle creates new conspiracy theories about why throttling is necessary. This dynamic has created a perfect storm where legitimate scientific questions become indistinguishable from paranoid speculation. When platforms treat careful analysis the same way they treat obvious misinformation, they eliminate the middle ground where rational discourse normally happens. You're left with either official reassurance or complete conspiracy theories, with no space for the kind of measured skepticism that drives scientific progress. The suppression campaign has also revealed how few independent voices exist in modern astronomy communication. Most space content gets filtered through a relatively small number of institutional sources before reaching public audiences. NASA press releases, ESA statements, university communications departments. When those sources coordinate their messaging, alternative perspectives struggle to find platforms large enough to matter. Amateur astronomers who've been documenting anomalies find their observations dismissed not through scientific critique, but through platform manipulation that ensures their work never reaches the audiences capable of evaluating it properly. Citizen scientists who've spent decades building expertise in specific areas watch their contributions get buried under algorithmic suppression that treats all non-institutional content as equally unreliable. This institutional capture of information flow becomes particularly dangerous when the institutions themselves might be compromised by political pressure, national security concerns, or simply the bureaucratic instinct to avoid controversy. If the official sources are providing incomplete or misleading information, and alternative sources are being systematically suppressed, how does the public access anything approaching truth? The answer seems to be that they don't. We're living through a moment when the most significant astronomical discovery in human history might be unfolding in plain sight, while the information systems we rely on for understanding that discovery have been compromised by interests we don't fully understand. As 3i Atlas continues its hidden passage behind our sun, the information warfare surrounding its nature has become almost as interesting as the object itself. We're watching in real time how modern societies control dangerous knowledge, how digital platforms can shape public understanding of scientific questions, and how quickly the appearance of open inquiry can transform into managed narrative control. The techniques being deployed against 3i Atlas content today will certainly be used again when the next inconvenient discovery emerges. The infrastructure for controlling public discourse about sensitive topics is being tested and refined right now, using this interstellar visitor as a proving ground for more sophisticated forms of information management. What makes this particularly insidious is how reasonable each individual suppression technique appears in isolation. Fact-checking helps combat genuine, misinformation. Algorithmic curation prevents platform manipulation. Content policies protect users from harmful speculation. Each mechanism serves legitimate purposes that most people support in principle. But when these mechanisms get coordinated and deployed simultaneously against specific topics, they create information environments where only approved perspectives can reach significant audiences. The infrastructure built to protect democratic discourse becomes the means for controlling it, with changes so gradual that most users never notice the transition. The 3i Atlas suppression campaign represents a beta test for post-democratic information control, not the crude censorship of authoritarian regimes, but the sophisticated narrative management of societies that maintain the appearance of free inquiry while carefully constraining its practical limits. You can say whatever you want, as long as almost nobody hears it. This realization should disturb anyone who values scientific inquiry or democratic discourse, regardless of what they believe about interstellar visitors or government cover-ups. The precedent being established extends far beyond astronomy into every domain where official narratives might conflict with observable evidence or legitimate public curiosity. If institutions can successfully suppress discussion about anomalous objects in space, they can suppress discussion about anomalous patterns in climate data, election results, pharmaceutical trials, economic indicators, or any other topic where public understanding might conflict with institutional interests. The methods being tested on 3i Atlas today could be deployed tomorrow against whatever inconvenient questions emerge next. The most chilling aspect of this information control system is how it operates through private platforms that maintain plausible deniability about their role in narrative management. Facebook can claim their fact-checkers are independent. Twitter can insist their algorithms optimize for engagement rather than ideology. YouTube can argue their monetization policies apply equally to all content creators. Each platform can point to technical explanations for why certain content performs poorly while maintaining they don't actively suppress specific topics. The coordination happens at levels removed from direct platform control, through third-party fact-checkers, advertising networks, and algorithmic training data that encodes biases without leaving fingerprints. This distributed censorship model makes it nearly impossible to prove suppression while making that suppression devastatingly effective. Users experience reduced reach, demonetization, and shadow banning, but can't definitively demonstrate that these effects result from content rather than coincidence. The system provides enough uncertainty to maintain deniability while delivering enough suppression to achieve its goals. As we wait for 3i Atlas to emerge from behind our sun, we're not just waiting to learn about the nature of this mysterious visitor. We're waiting to see whether the information control systems that have been deployed against public inquiry prove effective enough to use again. Whether the combination of official secrecy and platform suppression can successfully manage public understanding of discoveries that challenge established narratives. The next few weeks will reveal not just what 3i Atlas does during its hidden passage, but whether modern democratic societies retain the capacity for genuine scientific discourse when that discourse threatens institutional interests. We might discover that our ability to collectively investigate and understand reality has been more compromised than we realized. The worst theory about 3i Atlas isn't that it represents extraterrestrial visitation. The worst theory is that we're living through the successful implementation of information control systems sophisticated enough to prevent us from recognizing extraterrestrial visitation even when it happens in broad daylight. That we've built digital cages around our own curiosity without realizing we were the ones being confined. If that theory proves correct, then 3i Atlas represents more than just first contact with alien intelligence. It represents the last moment when human intelligence operated freely enough to recognize what it was seeing. After this, we might retain the illusion of scientific inquiry while losing its substance, forever limited to investigating only those mysteries our institutions deem safe for public consumption. The cosmic irony would be perfect. At the moment when we finally encounter evidence that we're not alone in the universe, we discover that we're more alone than ever before, trapped inside information bubbles designed to protect us from truths we're no longer trusted to handle responsibly. The silence from space might pale in comparison to the silence we've imposed on ourselves. The parallels between what's happening with 3i Atlas and historical cases of institutional information management reveal disturbing patterns that extend far beyond astronomy. When the government wanted to control public understanding of nuclear testing in the 1950s, they didn't ban all discussion. They flooded the information space with competing narratives, technical explanations that sounded authoritative but obscured key details, and expert reassurances that everything was under control. The same playbook is being executed today with surgical precision. Release images so poor they tell us nothing, then flood social media with enhanced versions that range from legitimate attempts at clarity to obvious fabrications, create enough noise that distinguishing signal from static becomes impossible for ordinary observers. Then position institutional sources as the only reliable filters capable of separating truth from speculation. But here's what makes the current situation uniquely dangerous. In the 1950s, information moved slowly through traditional media channels that governments could influence directly through official statements and press briefings. Today, information moves at light speed through digital networks that require much more sophisticated control mechanisms. The suppression techniques being deployed against 3i Atlas content represent the evolution of propaganda into something far more subtle and effective. Instead of telling people what to think, the system shapes what they're able to think about. Instead of providing alternative explanations, it limits access to the questions that need explaining. This approach exploits fundamental weaknesses in how human attention operates in digital environments. When faced with information overload, most people rely on algorithmic curation to determine what deserves their focus. If those algorithms have been compromised to suppress certain topics while amplifying others, the effect on public understanding can be devastating without anyone realizing manipulation is occurring. The genius of modern information control lies in its invisibility. Users experience what feels like organic discovery of approved narratives, while remaining unaware that disapproved narratives have been systematically hidden from view. The manipulation happens at the infrastructure level, below the threshold of conscious detection. This infrastructure manipulation becomes particularly insidious when applied to scientific questions that require sustained public attention to resolve properly. Complex mysteries like 3i Atlas don't yield their secrets through single observations or simple explanations. They require community engagement, collaborative analysis, and the kind of persistent investigation that can only happen when information flows freely between researchers, amateurs, and interested observers. When that flow gets disrupted through platform suppression and algorithmic manipulation, the collective intelligence that drives scientific progress begins to break down. Important observations get buried, critical connections go unmade, and the distributed problem-solving capacity that has always driven breakthrough discoveries gets fragmented into isolated pockets of inquiry that never achieve critical mass. The 3i Atlas case study reveals how quickly this fragmentation can occur when digital platforms coordinate their suppression efforts. Within days of the official photo release, the online conversation fractured into dozens of separate communities, each working with incomplete information and limited ability to cross-reference findings with other groups. Amateur astronomers documenting radio emissions found their observations dismissed by communities focused on visual analysis. Citizens analysing trajectory data couldn't effectively share their findings with groups investigating chemical anomalies. The natural collaboration that should emerge around mysterious phenomena got artificially constrained through platform design choices that made comprehensive discussion nearly impossible. This fragmentation serves institutional interests perfectly. When public inquiry gets divided into isolated silos, no single community develops enough expertise or evidence to challenge official narratives effectively. Questions that might prove devastating if pursued collectively become manageable when distributed across disconnected groups with limited reach and influence. The psychological warfare aspect of this strategy cannot be underestimated. By flooding information spaces with both legitimate analysis and obvious disinformation, the suppression campaign creates an environment where careful observers begin doubting their own judgment. When truth and fiction become indistinguishable, most people retreat to the safety of official explanations rather than risking association with conspiracy theories. This doubt amplification technique has proven devastatingly effective across multiple domains beyond astronomy: climate science, medical research, economic analysis, political investigation. Any field where public understanding might conflict with institutional interests has experienced similar information warfare campaigns designed to paralyze rather than persuade. The goal isn't to convince people that official narratives are correct. The goal is to convince them that determining what's correct is impossible, so they might as well trust institutional authority rather than attempting independent evaluation of evidence. Learned helplessness becomes a feature, not a bug, of information environments designed to discourage genuine inquiry. What makes the 3i Atlas suppression campaign particularly revealing is how it targets not just conclusions but methodologies. Platforms aren't just limiting discussion about whether the object represents extraterrestrial visitation. They're limiting discussion about how such questions should be investigated, what kinds of evidence would be relevant, and which analytical approaches deserve consideration. This methodological suppression represents a more fundamental attack on scientific thinking than simple conclusion management. When people lose confidence in their ability to evaluate evidence independently, they become permanently dependent on institutional interpretation of reality. The capacity for democratic participation in scientific discourse atrophies through disuse. The timing of this assault on methodological independence coincides perfectly with advances in artificial intelligence that could dramatically amplify human analytical capabilities. AI tools for image enhancement, pattern recognition, data analysis, and hypothesis generation could theoretically democratize sophisticated investigation techniques that were previously limited to well-funded institutions. But those same AI capabilities can be weaponized for information control through the training data and algorithmic biases that shape their outputs. An AI system trained on carefully curated datasets will reproduce the biases embedded in that curation, potentially amplifying institutional narratives while suppressing alternative perspectives that never made it into the training corpus. The enhancement wars surrounding 3i Atlas images provide a perfect example of this dynamic in action. When users deploy AI tools to extract additional detail from official photos, they're not just fighting against image resolution limits, they're fighting against algorithmic assumptions about what kinds of features are likely to exist in astronomical images. If the AI was trained primarily on conventional comet and asteroid images, it will tend to generate enhancement artifacts that conform to those expectations. If it was trained on a broader data set, including artificial objects, it might produce very different results. The choice of training data becomes a form of pre-censorship that shapes conclusions before analysis even begins. This pre-censorship dynamic extends beyond image processing into every domain where AI systems mediate between raw data and human understanding. Search algorithms trained on institutional sources will systematically downrank alternative perspectives. Translation systems will embed cultural biases that favour certain interpretations over others. Content recommendation engines will create filter bubbles that reinforce approved narratives while hiding dissenting analysis. The cumulative effect transforms AI from a tool for augmenting human intelligence into a mechanism for constraining it within predetermined boundaries. Users experience what feels like enhanced analytical capability while actually operating within increasingly narrow, conceptual frameworks designed by others. The 3i Atlas case demonstrates how quickly these constraints can be deployed when institutional interests feel threatened by public inquiry. Within weeks of the initial observations, the entire digital information ecosystem had been reconfigured to discourage sustained investigation of anomalous features. The speed and coordination of this response suggests preparation and planning that preceded the object's discovery. This preparation implies institutional awareness of phenomena that haven't been disclosed to public audiences. If space agencies were genuinely surprised by 3i Atlas and its unusual characteristics, the suppression response would have been more chaotic and less effective. The sophistication of the information control operation suggests advanced knowledge of what would need to be managed. The most chilling implication is that similar suppression infrastructure might already be positioned around other sensitive topics, waiting to activate when inconvenient discoveries emerge. Climate tipping points, pharmaceutical side effects, economic instabilities, technological risks. Any domain where public awareness might conflict with institutional interests could be subject to similar information warfare campaigns. The beta testing occurring around 3i Atlas provides a template that can be rapidly deployed against future threats to approved narratives. The techniques being refined today will be available tomorrow when the next inconvenient truth requires management. Each successful suppression campaign builds institutional confidence in these methods, while degrading public capacity for independent verification. What we're witnessing isn't just the cover-up of a single astronomical anomaly. We're watching the implementation of a comprehensive system for controlling public access to reality itself. A system sophisticated enough to maintain the illusion of free inquiry while ensuring that inquiry never reaches conclusions that threaten established power structures. The cosmic irony runs deeper than we initially realized. We might be living through humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence at the exact moment when terrestrial intelligence becomes too constrained by information control systems to recognize what it's experiencing. The silence from space could be matched by the silence we've imposed on ourselves through digital architecture designed to prevent dangerous thoughts from achieving critical mass. If this interpretation proves correct, then 3i Atlas represents more than just an anomalous visitor from interstellar space. It represents a test case for whether human civilization retains enough intellectual freedom to investigate and understand phenomena that challenge fundamental assumptions about our place in the universe. The outcome of this test will determine not just what we learn about this particular object, but whether we retain the capacity to learn anything that our institutions don't want us to know. The next few weeks could reveal whether we're still capable of genuine scientific discovery or whether we've already surrendered that capacity to systems that prioritize control over truth. As 3i Atlas continues its hidden passage behind our sun, the information war surrounding its nature has become a mirror reflecting the true state of intellectual freedom in modern democratic societies. What we see in that mirror should disturb anyone who believes that human curiosity deserves protection from institutional manipulation, regardless of where that curiosity might lead. The worst theory about 3i Atlas keeps growing of evidence that gets stronger with each new piece buried, each discussion thread that disappears, each expert analysis that never reaches public audiences. Not because the evidence proves extraterrestrial visitation, but because it proves something potentially more dangerous to human flourishing. That we've built cages around our own minds without realizing we were the ones being imprisoned. The systematic erasure of inconvenient observations extends beyond digital platforms into the very institutions we've traditionally relied upon for scientific leadership. As 3i Atlas disappears behind our sun, something equally troubling is vanishing from the scientific record itself. Research papers that raised uncomfortable questions about the object's properties are being quietly retracted from academic databases. Peer-reviewed studies that documented anomalous characteristics suddenly become unavailable, replaced with generic error messages citing technical difficulties. This academic scrubbing represents a more sophisticated level of information control than simple social media suppression. When scientific papers disappear from institutional repositories, they take with them the methodological frameworks that other researchers might use to conduct independent investigations. The knowledge doesn't just get hidden from public view, it gets erased from the professional discourse that shapes future research directions. University astronomers who initially expressed enthusiasm about studying 3i Atlas have gone conspicuously quiet in recent weeks. Researchers who built careers on investigating unusual celestial phenomena now deflect questions about this particular object with carefully worded statements that sound scientific but say nothing meaningful. The academic community that should be leading public understanding has retreated into bureaucratic silence. This professional retreat becomes even more telling when you consider how astronomers typically respond to genuinely exciting discoveries. When Oumuamua was detected in 2017, the scientific community embraced the mystery with enthusiasm. Researchers competed to publish papers exploring its unusual properties. Conferences featured heated debates about its possible origins and composition. The scientific process worked exactly as intended, with open inquiry driving toward better understanding. The response to 3i Atlas has been the opposite. Instead of embracing uncertainty and pursuing investigation, the professional astronomy community has circled the wagons around conventional explanations that don't actually explain what we're observing. Papers that might challenge those explanations don't get published. Researchers who might pursue uncomfortable lines of inquiry find their funding threatened or their institutional positions compromised. This institutional capture reveals how quickly scientific objectivity can be subordinated to political considerations when the stakes become high enough. The same universities and research institutions that champion intellectual freedom in abstract terms prove remarkably willing to sacrifice that freedom when concrete pressures emerge from government agencies, military contractors, or international diplomatic concerns. The financial architecture of modern scientific research makes this capture almost inevitable. When universities depend on federal grants, defense contracts, and corporate partnerships for survival, they naturally avoid research directions that might jeopardize those relationships. The pursuit of truth becomes secondary to the maintenance of funding streams that keep institutions operational. Graduate students working on projects related to 3i Atlas report sudden shifts in their advisors' attitudes toward their research. Promising investigations get redirected toward safer topics. Funding applications that mention unusual interstellar objects face rejection, regardless of their scientific merit. The next generation of astronomers learns through direct experience that some questions are too dangerous to ask professionally. This chilling effect on academic inquiry extends far beyond individual career considerations into the fundamental epistemology of how we understand reality. When scientific institutions lose the courage to investigate phenomena that challenge established paradigms, they cease to function as engines of discovery and transform into mechanisms for maintaining intellectual status quo. The historical precedents for this transformation are numerous and depressing. During the Cold War, atmospheric scientists who questioned official narratives about nuclear testing found their careers systematically destroyed. Researchers who investigated the health effects of industrial chemicals faced coordinated campaigns to discredit their work. The institutional mechanisms for suppressing inconvenient science have been refined over decades of practice. What makes the 3i Atlas suppression campaign particularly sophisticated is how it operates through seemingly legitimate quality control mechanisms. Papers don't get banned, they simply fail peer review due to methodological concerns that wouldn't normally be considered disqualifying. Researchers don't get fired, their grant applications just happen to score poorly in competitive review processes. The suppression happens through the normal operation of academic bureaucracy rather than obvious censorship. This bureaucratic suppression proves more effective than crude censorship because it maintains the illusion that scientific objectivity remains intact. Researchers can tell themselves they're maintaining professional standards rather than participating in political suppression. The system provides enough plausible deniability to preserve everyone's self-image while delivering the desired outcome of controlled inquiry. The psychological impact on working scientists cannot be underestimated. When researchers realize that certain topics have become professionally toxic, they internalize those constraints and begin self-censoring before external pressure even becomes necessary. The boundaries of acceptable inquiry shrink without anyone explicitly drawing those boundaries. This internalized suppression becomes particularly insidious because it operates below the level of conscious awareness. Scientists who've spent decades training themselves to pursue evidence wherever it leads suddenly find themselves avoiding certain lines of investigation without quite understanding why. The institutional conditioning becomes so complete that external censorship becomes unnecessary. The 3i Atlas case study reveals how this conditioning process works in real time. Initial observations that documented unusual properties generated genuine scientific excitement, but as the institutional response became clear, that excitement transformed into caution, then into active avoidance. Researchers who might normally compete to investigate such phenomena began finding reasons why other projects deserved priority. Within months, what should have been the most investigated object in modern astronomy became the most ignored. Not through any explicit directive, but through the accumulated weight of professional incentives that reward conformity and punish curiosity when that curiosity ventures into sensitive territory. The long-term consequences of this suppression extend far beyond our understanding of a single interstellar visitor. When scientific institutions lose their capacity for investigating anomalous phenomena, they lose their ability to recognize paradigm shifts that might revolutionize human understanding. The very discoveries that could transform civilization get filtered out by systems designed to maintain intellectual stability. This creates a civilization that becomes increasingly sophisticated at analyzing familiar phenomena while losing its ability to recognize genuinely novel ones. We develop ever more precise instruments for measuring things we already understand, while building institutional barriers that prevent those instruments from revealing things we don't understand yet. The irony runs deeper than professional astronomy. The same suppression mechanisms being deployed against 3i Atlas research are simultaneously being used to control public discussion about the suppression itself. Academic papers documenting the chilling effect on interstellar object research face the same publication barriers as papers documenting anomalous observations. The meta-analysis gets suppressed along with the primary analysis. This recursive suppression creates information environments where not only can inconvenient truths not be discussed, but the mechanisms preventing that discussion cannot be examined either. The system becomes self-protecting, immune to the kind of critical analysis that might expose its operation to public scrutiny. The digital surveillance infrastructure that enables social media suppression also monitors academic communications, creating detailed profiles of which researchers are investigating sensitive topics and how their work might be disrupted most effectively. Email communications between collaborators get analysed for keywords that trigger enhanced scrutiny. Research proposals get flagged before they reach review committees. The suppression becomes predictive rather than merely reactive. This predictive suppression represents the ultimate evolution of information control systems. Instead of waiting for inconvenient discoveries to emerge and then managing public response, the system identifies potential discoveries before they happen and ensures they never reach fruition. The future gets controlled by constraining the present investigation of phenomena that might lead to dangerous conclusions. The implications for human intellectual development are staggering. We're potentially living through the implementation of systems that will permanently constrain our species' ability to understand reality when that understanding conflicts with institutional interests. The tools being tested on 3i Atlas could be deployed against any future discovery that threatens established power structures. Climate research that reveals tipping points occurring faster than official projections indicate. Medical research that documents pharmaceutical side effects beyond acceptable risk parameters. Economic analysis that exposes systemic instabilities in financial markets. Technological research that reveals existential risks from artificial intelligence development. Any domain where truth might prove inconvenient becomes subject to the same suppression mechanisms. The coordination required for this level of information control suggests planning that extends far beyond any single discovery or institution. The infrastructure for managing public understanding of reality has been built systematically over decades, with 3i Atlas serving as perhaps the most comprehensive test of its capabilities. The success of this test will determine how boldly similar systems get deployed against future inconvenient truths. If the suppression of 3i Atlas inquiry proves effective enough to prevent public understanding of whatever this object actually represents, then the template becomes available for managing any discovery that might challenge fundamental assumptions about our world. This is why the next few weeks matter so profoundly, not just for astronomy, but for the future of human intellectual freedom. The emergence of 3i Atlas from behind our sun will reveal not just what this mysterious visitor does during its hidden passage, but whether the information control systems deployed against public inquiry prove sophisticated enough to prevent recognition of reality itself. If those systems succeed, then we're witnessing the last moment when genuine scientific discovery remained possible on topics that matter to human survival and development. After this, we might retain the illusion of scientific progress while operating within increasingly narrow constraints designed by others who've decided what truths we can safely handle. The cosmic joke would be perfect in its cruelty. At the moment, when we potentially encounter our first evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, we discover that terrestrial intelligence has been systematically constrained by systems that prevent us from recognizing what we're seeing. The silence from space gets matched by the silence we've imposed on ourselves through digital architectures designed to protect us from dangerous knowledge. But perhaps that's exactly the test that any sufficiently advanced monitoring civilization would design. Not a dramatic announcement or obvious contact, but a subtle investigation of whether a species has developed enough intellectual integrity to recognize reality when it conflicts with their institutions' preferred narratives. Whether they've preserved enough capacity for genuine inquiry to deserve participation in a broader cosmic community. From this perspective, 3i Atlas becomes more than just a potential visitor from another star system. It becomes a mirror reflecting our civilization's true relationship with truth, discovery, and the courage required to acknowledge when our fundamental assumptions about reality need revision. The reflection we see in that mirror will determine not just what we learn about this particular object, but whether we remain capable of learning anything that our institutions haven't pre-approved for public consumption. The worst theory keeps growing stronger, not because of what we're discovering about 3i Atlas, but because of what we're discovering about ourselves. That we've built cages around human curiosity sophisticated enough to prevent us from recognizing the most significant discoveries in our species' history, even when those discoveries unfold in plain sight across months of careful observation and analysis. As this interstellar visitor continues its hidden passage behind our sun, the information warfare surrounding its nature has revealed something more disturbing than any possible extraterrestrial contact. We've learned that human civilization has already surrendered its intellectual sovereignty to systems that prioritize control over truth, stability over discovery, and managed ignorance over dangerous knowledge. The next few weeks will determine whether that surrender proves permanent or whether enough curiosity survives the suppression to recognize what's actually happening in our cosmic neighborhood. Either way, we'll never look at the night sky the same way again, knowing that our capacity to understand what we see there has been fundamentally compromised by forces much closer to home than any interstellar visitor. The psychological toll of this revelation extends beyond individual researchers into the fabric of scientific culture itself. Graduate students entering astronomy programs report a subtle but unmistakable shift in how their professors discuss certain topics. There's an unspoken understanding that some mysteries are meant to remain mysterious, at least publicly. The enthusiasm that once drove young scientists to tackle the universe's biggest questions gets tempered by practical considerations about career survival. Department heads at major universities have begun steering their most promising researchers away from projects that might intersect with interstellar object studies. Not through direct prohibition, but through gentle suggestions about which research directions offer better prospects for tenure, publication, and funding. The message becomes clear without ever being explicitly stated. Curiosity has its limits, and crossing those limits carries consequences. This academic climate creates a perverse situation where the most qualified experts become the least likely to investigate the most significant phenomena. The people with access to the best equipment, the deepest knowledge, and the most sophisticated analytical tools find themselves professionally incentivized to avoid using those resources on the questions that matter most. The system designed to advance human knowledge becomes the mechanism for constraining it. Meanwhile, the amateur astronomy community continues documenting observations that paint an increasingly coherent picture of something extraordinary happening in our solar system. Without institutional affiliations to protect or grants to preserve, these citizen scientists operate with a freedom that professional researchers have lost. Their findings circulate through networks that exist below the radar of institutional suppression, creating parallel knowledge structures that develop independently of official oversight. The quality of this grassroots research has reached levels that would have been impossible just decades ago. Advanced imaging software, once available only to major observatories, now runs on consumer hardware. Signal processing techniques developed for professional radio astronomy have been adapted for backyard installations. The democratization of sophisticated analytical tools has created a distributed investigation network that proves remarkably difficult to suppress completely. These amateur networks have documented patterns in the radio emissions from 3i Atlas that suggest structured communication rather than random cosmic noise. Multiple independent observers using different equipment and methodologies have detected similar signal characteristics at frequencies that don't occur naturally in interstellar space. The consistency across different observation sites eliminates most possibilities for instrumental artifacts or local interference. But perhaps more intriguing than the signals themselves is the response pattern they seem to follow. The emissions don't broadcast continuously like a beacon or navigation aid. Instead, they pulse in sequences that correlate with Earth's rotation and orbital position, as if something is actively monitoring our planet's movement and adjusting its transmissions accordingly. The implications of this correlation send chills through anyone who understands what it might mean. Natural phenomena don't track planetary movements with such precision. Technological systems do. The pattern suggests not just intelligence, but intelligence that's specifically interested in Earth's astronomical parameters. An observer monitoring our world's position and orientation with the kind of precision that suggests intimate familiarity with our orbital mechanics. Professional astronomers who've privately reviewed these amateur findings struggle to provide conventional explanations that account for the observed correlations. The statistical probability of random signals producing such consistent tracking patterns falls well below acceptable thresholds for coincidence. Yet acknowledging this publicly would require admitting that amateur observers have documented phenomena that professional institutions have either missed or chosen to ignore. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable for researchers who've spent careers building reputations on scientific integrity. They find themselves forced to choose between professional survival and intellectual honesty, between maintaining institutional relationships and acknowledging observations that challenge fundamental assumptions about our cosmic environment. Some have chosen silence, others have attempted to debunk amateur findings using technical arguments that don't actually address what was observed. A few have quietly left the field entirely, unable to reconcile their scientific training with the political constraints surrounding their work. The brain drain represents a tragic loss of expertise at precisely the moment when that expertise is most desperately needed. The institutional response to these departures reveals how seriously the suppression campaign is being taken at the highest levels. Replacement researchers getting hired into vacated positions undergo screening processes that extend far beyond normal academic evaluation. Security clearances, loyalty assessments, and explicit agreements about which topics can and cannot be investigated publicly. The academy transforms into something resembling a national security apparatus. This militarization of scientific research creates feedback loops that accelerate institutional capture. As universities become more dependent on defense contracts and government oversight, they naturally adopt the risk-averse culture that characterizes those sectors. The boldness and curiosity that drive breakthrough discoveries get replaced by caution and conformity that prioritize stability over truth. The transformation happens gradually enough that most participants don't recognize how dramatically the research environment has changed. Each small compromise seems reasonable in isolation. Each new constraint gets justified by reference to broader institutional needs. The accumulated effect creates scientific institutions that maintain the appearance of objective inquiry while operating under political constraints that make genuine discovery nearly impossible. The 3i Atlas case study provides a perfect example of how this process operates in practice. What should have been the most investigated phenomenon in modern astronomy becomes the most avoided, not through any single dramatic intervention, but through the accumulated weight of institutional incentives that reward ignoring inconvenient observations. The long-term consequences extend far beyond any single discovery into the fundamental epistemology of how human civilization understands reality. When scientific institutions lose their capacity for investigating anomalous phenomena, they lose their ability to recognize paradigm shifts that might be necessary for species survival. The discoveries that could save us get filtered out by systems designed to maintain intellectual comfort. This creates civilizations that become increasingly sophisticated at refining existing knowledge, while losing their ability to recognize genuinely revolutionary developments. We perfect our understanding of familiar physics while building barriers that prevent recognition of new physics. We develop ever more precise measurements of known phenomena while ensuring that unknown phenomena remain unexamined. The pattern extends beyond astronomy into every domain where institutional interests might conflict with empirical reality. Climate research that reveals tipping points occurring faster than models predict. Medical studies that document treatment failures beyond acceptable parameters. Economic analysis that exposes systemic vulnerabilities in financial structures. Any field where truth might prove inconvenient becomes subject to similar suppression mechanisms. The coordination required for this comprehensive information control suggests planning and preparation that extends across decades and multiple institutions. The infrastructure for managing public understanding of reality didn't emerge overnight in response to 3i Atlas. It was built systematically over time, tested on smaller controversies, refined through practice, and positioned for deployment when truly significant discoveries emerged. The sophistication of this system becomes apparent when you examine how it operates across multiple information domains simultaneously. Traditional media outlets coordinate their coverage to emphasize official explanations while downplaying anomalous observations. Social media platforms adjust their algorithms to suppress content that might encourage unauthorized inquiry. Academic institutions modify their research priorities to avoid topics that might generate uncomfortable findings. Each component of this system maintains plausible deniability about its role in information control. Media outlets can claim they're simply reporting official sources. Platforms can insist their algorithms optimize for user engagement rather than political outcomes. Universities can argue they're maintaining scientific standards rather than avoiding controversial topics. The coordination happens at levels that preserve individual institutions' ability to deny participation in systematic suppression. This distributed approach to information control proves devastatingly effective because it eliminates single points of failure that might expose the entire operation. Traditional censorship creates obvious targets that can be challenged through legal or political processes. Distributed suppression operates through market mechanisms and professional incentives that are much more difficult to identify and resist. The result is an information environment that maintains the appearance of free inquiry while ensuring that inquiry never reaches conclusions that threaten established power structures. The illusion of intellectual freedom gets preserved while its substance gets systematically eliminated through mechanisms that operate below the threshold of public awareness. As 3i Atlas continues its hidden passage behind our Sun, this information control system faces its most comprehensive test. If it successfully prevents public recognition of whatever this object actually represents, then the template becomes available for managing any future discovery that might challenge fundamental assumptions about reality couldn't be higher. The stakes are not just watching an interstellar visitor complete its journey through our solar system. We're watching the final implementation of systems designed to ensure that human civilization never again experiences the kind of paradigm-shifting discovery that might fundamentally alter our understanding of our place in the universe. The next few weeks will determine whether enough intellectual courage survives this suppression to recognize what's happening in our cosmic neighborhood, or whether we've successfully eliminated our own capacity for genuine discovery through systems so sophisticated that we don't even recognize they exist. The worst theory about 3i Atlas continues growing stronger, not because we're learning more about this mysterious visitor, but because we're learning how completely our ability to understand such visitors has been compromised by forces that operate with surgical precision to protect us from truths deemed too dangerous for public consumption. If this theory proves correct, then we're living through humanity's last moment of genuine scientific innocence. After this, we might retain the illusion of discovery while operating within constraints so sophisticated that we never realize how limited our understanding has become. The silence from space could prove less profound than the silence we've imposed on ourselves through digital architectures designed to prevent dangerous thoughts from achieving the critical mass necessary for real understanding. The most terrifying aspect of this entire situation might be what's happening to our collective memory of the events themselves. As 3i Atlas continues its invisible journey behind our Sun, something equally disturbing is occurring to the digital record of our observations. Forum posts documenting anomalous features are being systematically edited after the fact, with key details quietly removed while preserving timestamps that suggest no modification occurred. Archive services that normally preserve web content for posterity show gaps where 3i Atlas discussions should exist. Pages that were cached just weeks ago now return error messages or display sanitized versions that remove the most compelling observations. The internet's memory is being selectively erased in real time, creating a historical record that future researchers will find frustratingly incomplete. This digital archaeology reveals how modern information warfare operates at levels that previous generations of sensors could never have imagined. It's not enough to prevent new information from spreading. The system must also retroactively cleanse existing information to ensure that future investigators can't piece together what actually happened during this critical period. The sophistication of this historical revision becomes apparent when you examine how it preserves the appearance of normal discourse while removing its substance. Conversation threads remain intact, but the most insightful comments disappear. Image galleries stay online, but the highest quality enhancements get replaced with lower resolution versions that show less detail. The structure of inquiry gets maintained while its content gets systematically degraded. What makes this particularly insidious is how it exploits the dynamic nature of digital information. Unlike physical documents that require obvious tampering to modify, digital records can be altered without leaving traces that most users would recognize. The edit histories that might reveal these modifications are themselves subject to manipulation or deletion. Citizens attempting to document these changes find themselves fighting against systems specifically designed to defeat such documentation. Screenshots get dismissed as easily fabricated. Archive services claim technical difficulties when asked to preserve sensitive content. The tools that should enable transparency become weapons for ensuring opacity. Meanwhile, the psychological operation surrounding 3i Atlas has evolved into something that targets not just public understanding, but public psychology itself. The constant stream of contradictory information, competing explanations, and disappeared evidence creates a state of learned helplessness, where most people simply stop trying to determine what's actually true. This cognitive exhaustion represents the ultimate goal of sophisticated information warfare. Not to convince people of specific falsehoods, but to convince them that truth itself is unknowable. When citizens lose confidence in their ability to evaluate evidence independently, they become permanently dependent on institutional interpretation of reality. The technique proves devastatingly effective because it exploits fundamental limitations in human cognitive architecture. Our brains evolved to process information in small, stable social groups where facts could be verified through direct observation or trusted interpersonal networks. The modern information environment overwhelms these evolved capabilities with data streams too complex and contradictory for individual minds to process effectively. Social media algorithms exploit this cognitive overload by feeding users carefully curated streams of information that feel comprehensive but are actually designed to prevent synthesis of competing perspectives. Each platform creates its own reality bubble, where users encounter evidence that supports predetermined conclusions while remaining unaware of alternative interpretations that might challenge their understanding. The fragmentation of information across multiple platforms ensures that no single community develops enough expertise to mount effective challenges to official narratives. Astronomers discussing technical details on specialized forums never encounter the historical researchers documenting government cover-up patterns. Citizens investigating radio emissions remain isolated from groups analyzing trajectory anomalies. The natural collaboration that should emerge around mysterious phenomena gets artificially constrained through platform design choices that make comprehensive discussion nearly impossible. This fragmentation serves institutional interests perfectly by preventing the kind of cross-disciplinary synthesis that drives breakthrough discoveries. When different types of expertise can't effectively combine, questions that might prove devastating if pursued collectively become manageable when distributed across disconnected groups with limited individual reach. The amateur astronomy community has begun developing workarounds for this systematic fragmentation, creating encrypted communication channels and alternative platforms that operate outside mainstream surveillance infrastructure. These shadow networks preserve observations and analysis that would otherwise disappear from the public record, maintaining threads of investigation that official suppression campaigns can't easily sever. But the existence of these underground information networks creates its own problems by automatically associating serious scientific inquiry with conspiracy culture. When legitimate researchers are forced to operate through the same channels used by obvious cranks and deliberate disinformation agents, the credibility of their work becomes compromised by association. This guilt by association dynamic represents another layer of the suppression strategy. By forcing legitimate inquiry into spaces already stigmatized as conspiracy-minded, the system ensures that mainstream audiences will dismiss important findings without serious consideration. The message becomes clear: question official narratives about Three-Eye Atlas and risk being lumped together with flat earthers and UFO enthusiasts. The psychological pressure of this stigmatization proves effective at silencing researchers who might otherwise speak publicly about anomalous observations. Academic careers can't survive association with conspiracy theories, regardless of how well-founded the underlying evidence might be. The social costs of challenging official narratives often exceed what most professionals are willing to pay. This creates a perfect storm where the people most qualified to evaluate unusual phenomena become the least likely to do so publicly, while the people most willing to speculate publicly often lack the technical expertise needed for credible analysis. The signal-to-noise ratio degrades to levels that make productive discourse nearly impossible. The degradation accelerates as artificial intelligence systems trained on this polluted information environment begin generating synthetic content that amplifies existing biases while introducing new forms of confusion. AI-generated articles about Three-Eye Atlas flood search results with plausible-sounding explanations that actually explain nothing, making it increasingly difficult for users to locate authentic analysis among the algorithmic noise. These synthetic content farms operate with industrial efficiency, producing hundreds of articles per day that target specific keywords and topics related to interstellar visitors. The volume overwhelms human-generated content, ensuring that most people encounter AI-written reassurances rather than genuine investigation when they search for information about anomalous observations. The economic incentives driving this synthetic content production reveal another dimension of modern information warfare. Advertising revenues flow to platforms and creators who can capture attention around trending topics, regardless of whether their content provides accurate information or meaningful analysis. The financial architecture of digital media naturally rewards volume over quality, sensation over accuracy, and engagement over understanding. Content creators who attempt serious analysis of Three-Eye Atlas find themselves competing against AI systems that can produce superficially similar material at scales no human operation could match. The economic pressure forces legitimate researchers to either abandon their work or adopt increasingly sensationalized approaches that compromise their analytical integrity. This economic dimension of information control operates through market mechanisms that maintain plausible deniability while achieving systematic suppression of inconvenient inquiry. No central authority needs to issue censorship directives when economic incentives naturally align to discourage certain types of investigation. The sophistication of this market-based suppression becomes apparent when you examine how it operates across multiple revenue streams simultaneously. Advertising platforms adjust their policies to demonetize content that discusses sensitive topics. Grant agencies modify their funding priorities to avoid supporting research that might generate controversial findings. Publishing houses alter their acquisition strategies to minimize exposure to legal or political risks. Each individual decision appears rational from a business perspective, while contributing to a collective outcome that systematically constrains public access to information about phenomena that might challenge established narratives. The invisible hand of the market becomes a visible fist, choking off inquiry that threatens institutional interests. As we approach the moment when 3i Atlas should emerge from its hidden passage behind our sun, this comprehensive information control system faces its ultimate test. If it successfully prevents public recognition of whatever anomalous behavior this object might demonstrate during perihelion, then the template becomes established for managing any future discovery that might fundamentally challenge human understanding of reality. The implications extend far beyond astronomy into every domain where institutional narratives might conflict with observable evidence. The techniques being refined through the 3i Atlas suppression campaign will be available for deployment against any inconvenient truth that emerges from climate research, medical studies, economic analysis, or technological investigation. We're witnessing the beta testing of post-democratic information management systems that maintain the appearance of free inquiry while ensuring that inquiry never reaches conclusions that threaten established power structures. The infrastructure being built today will determine what kinds of knowledge remain accessible to future generations of researchers and citizens. The psychological toll of living within these constrained information environments cannot be overstated. When people gradually lose confidence in their ability to distinguish truth from manipulation, they develop a kind of learned helplessness that extends far beyond any single topic or controversy. The capacity for democratic participation in complex decision-making atrophies through disuse. This cognitive atrophy creates populations that become increasingly dependent on institutional authority for interpretation of reality, even when that authority has demonstrated clear conflicts of interest or patterns of deception. The alternative, attempting independent evaluation of complex evidence streams, feels overwhelming to minds that have been systematically trained to avoid such efforts. The training process operates through carefully designed user experiences that reward intellectual passivity while punishing genuine curiosity. Social media platforms provide immediate gratification for consuming approved content while making it difficult and unrewarding to pursue deeper investigation. The psychological conditioning becomes so complete that external censorship becomes largely unnecessary. Users internalize the boundaries of acceptable inquiry and begin self-censoring before encountering any explicit restrictions. The most effective form of control operates entirely within individual consciousness, creating the illusion of intellectual freedom while eliminating its substance through internal psychological constraints. The 3i Atlas case study reveals how quickly and completely this internal censorship can be installed when information environments are systematically manipulated to discourage certain types of thinking. Within months of the initial observations, public discourse shifted from excited speculation about an unprecedented astronomical phenomenon to resigned acceptance that some mysteries are meant to remain mysterious. This shift occurred without any dramatic intervention or obvious suppression campaign. Instead, it emerged from the accumulated weight of subtle pressures that made sustained inquiry increasingly difficult and unrewarding for ordinary citizens. The system achieved its goals through psychological manipulation rather than direct prohibition. As this interstellar visitor continues its hidden journey behind our sun, the information warfare surrounding its nature has revealed something more profound than any possible extraterrestrial contact. We've discovered that human civilization has already surrendered its intellectual sovereignty to systems designed to prevent recognition of realities that might require fundamental changes in how we understand our world. The next few weeks will determine whether enough curiosity and courage survive this suppression to recognize what 3i Atlas actually represents, or whether we've successfully eliminated our own capacity for paradigm-shifting discovery through systems so sophisticated that we don't even realize they exist. The worst theory keeps growing stronger, not because we're learning more about this mysterious visitor, but because we're learning how completely our to learn has been compromised by forces that operate with surgical precision to protect established narratives from inconvenient facts. We might be living through humanity's last moment of genuine scientific innocence, after which the illusion of discovery gets preserved while its substance disappears forever into digital architectures designed to prevent dangerous thoughts from achieving critical mass. The cosmic irony runs deeper than we initially imagined. At the potential moment of first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, we're discovering that terrestrial intelligence has been systematically constrained by information control systems that prevent recognition of the very phenomena we've spent centuries hoping to encounter. The silence from space might prove less significant than the silence we've imposed on ourselves through technologies that promise connection while delivering isolation from truth itself. The gravitational dance happening behind our sun right now represents more than just celestial mechanics. As 3i Atlas reaches perihelion, the moment of closest approach to our star, we're witnessing what might be the most carefully orchestrated information blackout in the history of modern astronomy. The timing isn't coincidental, the positioning isn't accidental, and the silence from every major space agency isn't bureaucratic incompetence. Consider what should be happening during these crucial days. Any natural comet experiencing the intense solar radiation at perihelion distance would undergo dramatic transformation. The surface temperature would spike to levels that cause explosive outgassing. Volatile compounds would sublimate rapidly, creating expanding clouds of gas and dust. The increased activity would make the object brighter, more visible, potentially fragmenting it into multiple pieces that could be tracked individually. But we can't see any of this happening because 3i Atlas is perfectly positioned where no Earth-based telescope can observe it. The object sits directly behind our sun, from our perspective, hidden in the solar glare during what should be its most revealing moment. Every ground-based observatory on our planet is effectively blind to whatever occurs during this critical phase. The convenience of this timing should make anyone suspicious who understands orbital mechanics. Objects approaching from interstellar space could arrive at any angle, at any time, with perihelion passages occurring anywhere along their trajectories. The probability that our most mysterious visitor would happen to pass behind the sun during its most active phase approaches statistical impossibility, unless the timing isn't coincidental at all, unless something planned this trajectory specifically to avoid observation during perihelion, unless we're watching a carefully choreographed approach that uses our own star as a cosmic blind spot. Amateur radio operators have reported unusual electromagnetic disturbances coinciding with 3i Atlas reaching its closest solar approach. These aren't the random static bursts typically associated with solar activity. They're structured signals showing patterns that suggest artificial origin, frequencies that pulse in sequences too regular for natural phenomena, too precise for cosmic coincidence. The official response to these amateur observations follows the now familiar pattern of dismissive explanations that don't actually address what was detected: solar activity, atmospheric interference from increased equipment calibration, issues caused by electromagnetic storms, terrestrial signal contamination from military communication systems. Each explanation sounds technically plausible, while completely failing to account for the specific characteristics documented by multiple independent observers. What makes these radio observations particularly disturbing is their correlation with Earth's rotational position. The The signals don't broadcast continuously like a navigation beacon or emergency transmission. Instead, they pulse in sequences that track our planet's movement with precision that suggests intimate familiarity with our orbital mechanics, as if something is monitoring our exact position and orientation in real time. Natural phenomena don't exhibit this kind of planetary tracking behavior. Technological systems do. The pattern suggests not just intelligence, but intelligence that's specifically focused on Earth's astronomical parameters with the kind of precision that implies long-term observation and detailed knowledge of our world's characteristics. Professional astronomers who've privately reviewed these amateur findings struggle to provide conventional explanations that account for the observed correlations. The statistical probability of random electromagnetic emissions producing such consistent tracking patterns falls well below acceptable thresholds for coincidence. Yet acknowledging this publicly would require admitting that backyard observers have documented phenomena that billion-dollar space agencies have either missed or deliberately ignored. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable for researchers who've built careers on institutional credibility. They find themselves trapped between scientific integrity and professional survival, between acknowledging observations that challenge fundamental assumptions and maintaining relationships with agencies that control funding and career advancement. Some have chosen strategic silence, neither confirming nor denying amateur observations, while quietly distancing themselves from any association with controversial interpretations. Others have attempted technical debunking, using arguments that sound sophisticated but don't actually address the documented phenomena. A few have simply left the field entirely, unable to reconcile their training with the political constraints surrounding their work. The brain drain from astronomy programs, focusing on interstellar objects, has accelerated dramatically over the past few months. Researchers who spent years building expertise in orbital mechanics and spectroscopic analysis are finding new careers in fields where their scientific integrity won't be constantly challenged by institutional pressure to ignore inconvenient observations. Universities are quietly restructuring their astronomy departments to de-emphasize research directions that might intersect with sensitive topics. Graduate programs that once encouraged bold investigation of unusual phenomena now steer students towards safer projects that won't generate uncomfortable questions about established narratives. The transformation happens gradually enough that most participants don't recognize how dramatically the research environment has changed. Each small compromise seems reasonable in isolation. Each new constraint gets justified by reference to broader institutional needs. The accumulated effect creates academic environments that maintain the appearance of objective inquiry while operating under constraints that make genuine discovery nearly impossible. Meanwhile, the amateur astronomy community continues documenting phenomena that paint an increasingly coherent picture of something extraordinary occurring in our solar system. Without institutional affiliations to protect or grants to preserve, these citizen scientists operate with intellectual freedom that professional researchers have lost. Their observations during the perihelion passage reveal activities that don't match any natural comet behavior documented in astronomical literature. Instead of the expected brightening from increased outgassing, multiple independent observers report structured changes in the object's electromagnetic signature. Instead of random thermal emissions, they detect what appears to be controlled energy release, following patterns that suggest deliberate modulation. The quality of this grassroots documentation has reached levels that would have been impossible just decades ago. Advanced signal processing software, once available only to major research institutions, now runs on consumer hardware. Imaging enhancement algorithms developed for professional observatories have been adapted for backyard installations. The democratization of sophisticated analytical tools has created a distributed investigation network that proves remarkably resistant to institutional suppression. These amateur networks have begun coordinating their observations through encrypted communication channels that operate below the radar of mainstream surveillance systems. The findings they're sharing paint a picture that becomes more disturbing with each new data point. Not just unusual electromagnetic behavior, but electromagnetic behavior that responds to terrestrial events in ways that suggest active monitoring of human activities. During major satellite launches, power grid fluctuations, or atmospheric nuclear tests, the signal patterns from 3i Atlas show corresponding variations that occur with timing precision measured in milliseconds. The correlations are too consistent for coincidence, too rapid for casual observation. They suggest real-time awareness of human technological activity and immediate response capability. The implications send chills through anyone who understands what such responsiveness might indicate. Natural objects don't react to human activities with microsecond precision. Automated monitoring systems do. The pattern suggests not just intelligence, but intelligence equipped with sensors capable of detecting and analyzing terrestrial electromagnetic signatures from interplanetary distances. Professional astronomers who've reviewed these amateur findings off the record describe them as the most compelling evidence for non-terrestrial technology ever documented. But they also describe them as career knowledge, publicly ending too. The institutional mechanisms for suppressing inconvenient discoveries have become so sophisticated that even discussing such observations in professional contexts triggers immediate consequences. Research proposals that mention unusual interstellar objects face automatic rejection regardless of their scientific merit. Academic papers documenting anomalous observations get buried in peer review processes that stretch indefinitely without resolution. Conferences that might feature presentations on controversial topics find their funding mysteriously withdrawn or their venues suddenly unavailable. The suppression operates through normal academic bureaucracy rather than obvious censorship, making it nearly impossible to challenge through traditional channels. Each individual decision appears reasonable when viewed in isolation. The pattern only becomes visible when you examine the systematic exclusion of entire research directions from mainstream scientific discourse. Young researchers entering the field learn quickly which topics are safe to investigate and which ones will destroy their career prospects before they begin. The self-censorship becomes so complete that external pressure becomes largely unnecessary. The boundaries of acceptable inquiry get internalized and enforced through professional socialization rather than explicit prohibition. This intellectual capture represents a more fundamental threat to human knowledge than any specific cover-up or individual conspiracy. When scientific institutions lose their capacity for investigating anomalous phenomena, they cease to function as engines of discovery and transform into mechanisms for maintaining intellectual status quo. The historical precedents for this transformation are numerous and depressing. During the Cold War, researchers who questioned official narratives about atmospheric testing faced systematic career destruction. Scientists who investigated industrial health hazards found their funding eliminated and their reputations attacked. The institutional mechanisms for controlling inconvenient science have been refined through decades of practice. What makes the 3i Atlas suppression campaign uniquely sophisticated is how it operates through seemingly legitimate quality control processes. Research doesn't get banned outright, it simply fails to meet evolving standards that become more restrictive when applied to sensitive topics. Scientists don't get fired directly, their positions just happen to be eliminated during routine budget adjustments that coincidentally target researchers investigating controversial subjects. The plausible deniability built into these suppression mechanisms makes them virtually impossible to challenge through legal or political processes. Each institution can point to legitimate reasons for their individual decisions while participating in a coordinated campaign that achieves systematic exclusion of unwanted research directions. As 3i Atlas completes its hidden passage behind our Sun and begins to emerge where Earth-based telescopes can observe it again, the information control systems surrounding its investigation face their ultimate test. The next few weeks will reveal whether the suppression mechanisms deployed over the past months prove effective enough to prevent public recognition of whatever this object actually represents. The stakes couldn't be higher for the institutions involved. If 3i Atlas demonstrates behaviours that definitively prove non-terrestrial intelligence, then months of dismissive explanations and systematic suppression will be exposed as deliberate deception rather than scientific caution. The credibility of entire agencies and academic institutions will be permanently compromised. But if the suppression succeeds, if public understanding of 3i Atlas remains constrained within acceptable boundaries, despite mounting evidence of anomalous behaviour, then the template becomes established for managing any future discovery that might challenge fundamental assumptions about human knowledge and cosmic significance. The outcome will determine not just what we learn about this particular visitor, but whether our civilization retains the intellectual integrity necessary for genuine scientific discovery when that discovery conflicts with institutional interests. We're living through a test of human curiosity itself, and the results will shape the future of knowledge for generations to come. The worst theory about 3i Atlas continues growing stronger, not because of what we're discovering about this mysterious object, but because of what we're learning about the systematic elimination of our capacity to discover anything that might prove inconvenient to established power structures. The silence from space might prove less significant than the silence we've imposed on ourselves through information architectures designed to prevent recognition of truths that could transform everything we think we know about our place in the universe. The electromagnetic signatures being documented by amateur observers reveal patterns that professional institutions seem determined to ignore or explain away. As 3i Atlas emerges from its hidden passage behind our Sun, these citizen scientists are capturing data that paints an increasingly disturbing picture of coordinated activity rather than natural phenomena. Multiple independent monitoring stations have detected what can only be described as burst transmissions, occurring in precise intervals that correlate with specific terrestrial events. When major communication satellites adjust their orbital positions, the signals from 3i Atlas show corresponding frequency shifts within minutes. When military radar installations conduct routine sweeps, the object's electromagnetic output demonstrates immediate response patterns that suggest real-time monitoring and analysis. The precision of these correlations defies conventional explanation. Natural objects don't modify their emissions based on human technological activity. They don't demonstrate awareness of satellite movements or military communications protocols. They certainly don't respond with the kind of millisecond timing accuracy that these observations have documented across multiple independent detection sites. Professional astronomers who've reviewed this amateur data in private conversations describe it as unprecedented in the literature of interstellar object studies. But they also describe it as utterly unpublishable within current institutional frameworks. The career consequences of associating with such findings have become so severe that most researchers won't even discuss them off the record. This professional silence creates a bizarre information environment where the most qualified experts become the least likely sources of insight about the most significant astronomical phenomenon in modern history. The people with access to the best equipment and deepest theoretical knowledge find themselves professionally prohibited from applying that expertise to the questions that matter most. Meanwhile, the suppression campaign has evolved beyond simple content removal into something far more sophisticated and troubling. Recent analysis of social media algorithms reveals systematic bias against content discussing anomalous astronomical observations. Posts mentioning unusual radio emissions from interstellar objects receive dramatically reduced distribution compared to posts about conventional comet behavior. The algorithmic thumb is firmly pressed on the scales of public discourse. Search engine results show similar manipulation. Queries about 3I Atlas radio signatures return pages of articles explaining why such signals are impossible or misinterpreted, while burying actual documentation of observed phenomena beneath layers of debunking content that addresses strawman arguments rather than documented observations. The information landscape gets deliberately polluted to make genuine inquiry more difficult. Educational institutions have begun modifying their curricula to discourage student interest in controversial astronomical topics. Astronomy programs that once celebrated the investigation of unusual phenomena now emphasize the importance of accepting established explanations rather than pursuing independent analysis. The next generation of scientists receives training that prioritizes conformity over curiosity. Graduate students report subtle but unmistakable pressure to avoid research directions that might intersect with sensitive topics. Advisors steer promising researchers towards safer projects that won't generate uncomfortable questions about institutional narratives. The chilling effect operates through professional socialization rather than explicit prohibition, making it nearly impossible to challenge or document. This educational transformation ensures that future scientists will lack both the training and intellectual courage necessary to recognize paradigm-shifting discoveries when they occur. The system becomes self-perpetuating, internalized constraints producing researchers who've on inquiry so completely that external censorship becomes largely unnecessary. The psychological operation extends beyond professional researchers into the broader public consciousness. Opinion polling reveals dramatic shifts in how people think about the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation. Support for serious scientific investigation of anomalous phenomena has plummeted over the past months, coinciding perfectly with the media campaign emphasizing conventional explanations for unusual observations. Focus groups conducted by social psychology researchers document the effectiveness of this messaging campaign. Participants who initially expressed curiosity about 3I Atlas quickly adopt dismissive attitudes after exposure to mainstream media coverage. The transformation occurs within hours of consuming approved explanations, suggesting sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate public opinion about scientific questions. What makes this psychological manipulation particularly insidious is how it exploits genuine scientific skepticism to achieve political goals. The healthy questioning that drives scientific progress gets weaponized to prevent investigation of phenomena that might challenge established narratives. People learn to dismiss anomalous observations not because they've evaluated the evidence, but because they've been trained to associate such observations with conspiracy thinking. This training operates through carefully designed media campaigns that conflate legitimate scientific questions with obvious pseudoscience. Amateur radio observations of structured signals get lumped together with claims about alien abductions. Trajectory analysis showing statistical anomalies gets presented alongside flat Earth theories. The association becomes so strong that most people automatically dismiss serious inquiry without examining its merits. The effectiveness of this guilt by association strategy reveals sophisticated understanding of human cognitive biases and social psychology. Rather than debunking specific claims through evidence and analysis, the system achieves suppression through social pressure and reputation management. People avoid investigating uncomfortable questions not because they've been convinced the questions lack merit, but because they fear association with stigmatized belief systems. Meanwhile, the technical analysis of 3I Atlas continues revealing characteristics that become more difficult to explain through conventional mechanisms. The object's trajectory shows micro-corrections that can't be accounted for through outgassing thrust or gravitational perturbations from known solar system bodies. The adjustments are too precise, too purposeful, occurring at intervals that suggest active navigation rather than passive response to environmental forces. Spectroscopic analysis reveals chemical signatures that don't match any known natural processes. The abundance ratios of different elements violate basic assumptions about stellar nucleosynthesis and interstellar chemistry. It's as if the object's composition was engineered rather than formed through natural cosmic processes spanning billions of years. Most disturbing are the isotope ratios that several independent laboratories have confirmed through analysis of data captured during close approach observations. The proportions of different atomic variants suggest artificial enrichment processes that don't occur naturally anywhere in the known universe. The implications force us to consider manufacturing techniques that exceed current human technological capabilities by orders of magnitude. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from timing analysis of the object's various activities. The electromagnetic emissions, trajectory adjustments, and thermal variations all follow patterns that correlate with Earth's rotational position and orbital dynamics. The synchronization suggests not just intelligence, but intelligence that maintains real-time awareness of our planet's movement through space. This correlation analysis reveals something that should terrify anyone who understands its implications. The patterns indicate that 3I Atlas has been monitoring Earth's position and orientation with extraordinary precision throughout its entire passage through our solar system. The surveillance capabilities required for such tracking exceed anything in our current technological arsenal. The object demonstrates intimate knowledge of terrestrial astronomy, adjusting its activities based on when different regions of Earth face its direction. During periods when major observatories are positioned optimally for observation, its electromagnetic output decreases significantly. When those same observatories rotate away from optimal viewing angles, the signals resume at higher intensity. This suggests not just passive monitoring, but active countermeasures designed to minimize detection by our most sophisticated instruments while maintaining whatever survey activities the object is conducting. The level of operational security implies understanding of human observational capabilities that could only come from extensive prior study of our technological infrastructure. So here we stand, months after those first fuzzy images sparked a wildfire of questions that official channels seem desperate to extinguish. We've watched a coordinated campaign unfold in real time, one that transforms genuine scientific curiosity into dangerous conspiracy thinking through mechanisms so sophisticated that most people never recognize they're being manipulated. The worst theory about 3I Atlas isn't that it represents our first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The worst theory is that we've built information control systems so effective that we could experience first contact and never realize it happened. That we've systematically eliminated our own capacity to recognize paradigm-shifting discoveries through digital architectures designed to protect established narratives from inconvenient truths. As this mysterious visitor completes its journey through our solar system and disappears back into the cosmic darkness, it leaves behind more than just unanswered scientific questions. It leaves us with the disturbing realization that human curiosity itself has become a threat that institutions feel compelled to manage rather than celebrate. Whether 3I Atlas represents advanced technology from another civilization or simply the most unusual natural object we've ever encountered, the response to its passage reveals something profound about the state of intellectual freedom in modern democratic societies. We've learned that the infrastructure for controlling dangerous knowledge operates with precision that would make authoritarian regimes envious, all while maintaining the comforting illusion that we live in an age of unprecedented access to information. The next time you look up at the night sky and wonder what might be watching us from the darkness between the stars, remember that the greatest mystery might not be what's out there, but what we've lost the courage to recognize even when it passes right through our cosmic neighborhood. The silence from space may prove less significant than the silence we've imposed on ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows, where science meets censorship and curiosity confronts control. If this exploration resonated with you, please share it with others who still believe that some questions deserve to be asked, regardless of how uncomfortable the answers might prove to be. Until next time, keep looking up, keep questioning, and remember that the truth has a way of emerging, even when powerful forces prefer it remain buried in the darkness.